Hello, everyone. Today I have a shorter episode for you, but I want to tackle the topic of refunds. A lot of clients wonder why there is not a refund for birth doula services if, let's say, they change their mind or if their birth was super duper fast and there wasn't even time for the doula to arrive. So I want to tackle that with you. And then they also talk about that in terms of postpartum. So I think it's really important, first of all, to remind everyone that a lot of doulas are doing this as their job. This is their career. This is what pays their electric bill and their rent and puts food on their table for their families. So I think that because this is heart work, a lot of times the business end of things is a little bit harder to tackle because when we love on people, it's really difficult to do the business end of things and be collecting payments and things like that. So, yes, it is hard work. We really love what we do and we really care about the parents and the families that we serve, but also we do have to get paid and people want, major discounts and things like that. But first I want to touch on, there's only so many births a person can take, right, for a birth doula. You can't serve 20 people in a month. You some people do one birth a month, some people do two. Some people will sign up for more, like four, five, six, especially if they have a team or they have kind of a backup rotation or something like that. But if you think about it, let's say somebody is charging $2,000 for their birth doula services, and that's including, you got to think too, it's including the prenatal meetings, the being on call for when you go into labor. Even if it ends up being a scheduled cesarean, that's still going to be something that the doula is carving out their time for. And they did take that spot for you and they can't replace it. They have, turned away other clients or potential customers in taking you on as their client. So when you, let's say you have a scheduled cesarean and maybe that makes you feel like, oh, well, either I don't want a doula now or I should have to pay less because they're not on call now or whatever that is, that's not the case because that still is the exact same spot that was taken for that other person. Also, keep in mind that birth doulas are independent contractors generally. And if not, they're working from themselves. And that's still a self employed type thing where we're paying a lot more in taxes. I've had CPAs recommend setting aside 30% for taxes for any income being brought in. So it's no longer $2,000 anymore. Now let's subtract 30% off of that. And that is now what we're making. And then think about how much time we take driving to and from a prenatal meeting, scheduling those things out, all of the text support, checking in on provider appointment days or anytime you text a question over, and then also being on call for, I mean, for us, it's 5 weeks, 37 to 42 week range. I know some people do like 38 to 42, but generally that on call time doesn't mean, oh, we're not coming if, you have your baby before that. It's really just, we're not going to be out of town anytime during that on-call window. So from 37 to 42 weeks being on call for you, great. If you have your baby at 37 weeks, we weren't on call as long, but we don't know that. And you may be on call, you might have your baby at the closer to the 42-week mark. So that being on call, then the being at the birth. How long is your birth going to be? I don't know. It could be 3 hours, that could be 23 hours that we're needing to be in person. Some doulas do charge more per hour after a certain time limit. So maybe 12 hours of in person care, and then you have to pay per hour after that, or 16 hours for in person care, and you have to pay per hour after that. I personally don't do that, at least not at the time of this recording. It is something I have thought about. However, I don't love putting parents on a time clock. I think it's kind of like the gas pump. You just sit there and you're filling it and you're like, how much longer is this going to go? um, I think that a watched pot never boils, and putting a time limit on things like that can be pretty stressful for somebody in labor. But I do understand the doulas that do that because there are times where I'm 20 something hours in a birth, and at a certain point, it's not going to be safe for me to drive home anymore. So I'm going to have to call in a backup doula if that happens. And then I have to pay a backup doula. So we're also considering that we may have a backup doula on for us in that rate that we're charging. And then you don't pay any less if it's 3 hours, and you don't pay any more if it's 12 hours. I don't want to penalize somebody for having a longer birth, and I'm not going to, benefit somebody for having a shorter birth because it doesn't have anything to do with their choice, right? They couldn't really choose that. And then that, first hour or two postpartum, and then the postpartum follow up visit as well. So at least that's how our packages are. So if you think about that, the only part that was the in person part was that little bit, right? And the rest was the prenatal meetings, the postpartum follow up, the communication throughout, and the being on call for that on call period. So if somebody has a planned cesarean that ends up being needed, let's say they have a breech baby and they don't want to go out of hospital, they want to have, a cesarean at the hospital for their breech baby because they don't have well, at least here in Austin, we don't get to have providers that are planning hospital-based breech births. Um, let's say it's that, or maybe you just all of a sudden you've decided I don't know that I want another person in my space. Maybe you love your doula, but all of a sudden you've really realized that you just want it to be you and your partner. Or your mom is decided she can come into town, even though she thought she wasn't going to be able to. And now you want her to perform that role for you, even though she's not technically a doula. That is a choice that you can make, but it doesn't mean that the doula won't be paid because you're still going to be responsible for completing your payments to your doula because that was a contractual obligation and something that you committed to and also she committed to. Just like she shouldn't, I'm saying she for the doula, not all doulas are she, but anyways, that's for the sake of my story here. She has committed to you and that she's not going to take too many clients and she's not going to charge. She usually will do 4, she's not going to do 6, she's going to do 4. And yes, there's always a chance that you would have to get a backup doula. But also, if you decline the backup doula, that's also not a reason to be reimbursed because usually most of us at least have in our contracts that you will get a backup doula if your doula for some reason, what if she wakes up with a fever, right? Or she breaks her leg, that would be awful. But any of those things that would happen would mean that she wouldn't be able to attend your birth. As long as she sends a backup doula, she's fulfilling her obligation. So I just wanted to chat a little bit about why we don't do um, refunds. I know that that is not a lovely topic for some parents, but I think that it's really important to understand the why behind that. I think that a lot of people think that this is more of a hobby for a lot of us, but the majority of the doulas on my team, this is what puts dinner on the table. And this is a job for us, even though it is an awesome job that we really love. And then for postpartum, right? So a postpartum doula generally only takes one client at a time and is with the same client for, let's say, 6 weeks at a time. So if they have carved out that time for 6 weeks of care for you, and they're starting somewhere between the 37 and the 42-week range, and you decide all of a sudden that you only want 1 week of care, well, that's not fair because this doula has turned away a bunch of work. They have declined other potential clients for that same time frame because they committed their time to you that they were going to be there for you. And now that is again their dinner on their table. You can't just say, I only want a week. I'm going to cancel the rest of it because she has committed to you just like you have committed to her. So that's just a really brief little overview of why we don't do refunds. If you have any questions, reach out. I'm always happy to answer them. Or if you have any topics that you want me to chat about here, I'm happy to do that as well. But I hope you guys have a great week. Thank you.